The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the San Diego, California trading post, and Katherine Edwards climbed down with hands that ached from gripping the reins for the past 8 hours straight. Her fingers raw and bleeding from where the leather had cut into her palms during the wild ride through bandit territory after their driver took a bullet to the shoulder, and she had to take over. It was September 1878, and the California sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street as Katherine steadied herself against the coach, her legs trembling from exhaustion and fear. The other passengers stumbled out behind her, their faces pale with shock, but Katherine barely noticed them. She was staring at her hands, turning them over slowly in the harsh afternoon light. They were a mess of blisters and blood, calluses layered upon calluses from years of hard work, dirt permanently embedded under her broken nails. These were not the hands of a lady. These were the hands of someone who had spent the last 6 years working her father's failing ranch in Arizona after her mother died. Someone who had hauled water and mended fences and broken horses until her palms were as tough as leather. A crowd had gathered around the stagecoach, drawn by the commotion and the visible bullet hole in the driver's seat. Katherine heard someone calling for a doctor, heard the driver groaning as they helped him down, but she could not stop staring at her hands. She had come to San Diego to start fresh, to perhaps find work as a seamstress or a shop girl, something respectable that might eventually lead to marriage and a normal life. But who would want a woman with hands like these? "Miss, are you hurt?" The voice was deep and gentle, and Katherine looked up to find herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing worn denim pants and a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. A weathered cowboy hat shaded his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, the concern etched in the slight furrow of his brow. He was perhaps 26 or 27, his face bearing the marks of someone who spent his days under the sun. "I am fine," Katherine said quickly, tucking her hands behind her back. She was 23, old enough to know better than to show weakness, old enough to have learned that people rarely helped without expecting something in return. Just tired from the journey. The cowboy's eyes flickered down to where she was hiding her hands, and something shifted in his expression. "Madam, you are bleeding. Please let me help you." "I said I am fine." Katherine's voice came out sharper than she intended, defensive. She tried to step around him, but her legs chose that moment to give out, and she would have fallen if he had not caught her by the elbow. "Easy there," he said, steadying her with a grip that was firm but surprisingly gentle. "When did you last eat?" Katherine tried to remember. "Yesterday morning." The day before. Time had blurred together during the nightmarish journey, especially after the bandits attacked and the driver was shot, and she found herself suddenly responsible for 6 terrified passengers and 4 panicked horses on a road she did not know. "I am not sure," she admitted. The cowboy made a decision. "Come on. There is a restaurant just down the street. You need food and water, and someone needs to look at those hands." "I cannot accept," Katherine protested, even as he gently but firmly guided her away from the stagecoach. "I do not even know your name, and I have no money to repay you." "Jackson Yates," he said simply. "And I am not asking for repayment. I am asking you to let me help because you look about ready to collapse, and I would not be able to sleep tonight knowing I left you here like this." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that Katherine had not heard in a long time, that made her defenses crack just slightly. She was so tired, so hungry, and her hands hurt terribly. "Katherine Edwards," she said quietly, "and thank you." The restaurant was small and simple, with wooden tables and the smell of beef stew filling the air. Jackson led her to a corner table and pulled out a chair for her, which struck Katherine as oddly formal given his rough appearance. When she sat, she automatically placed her hands in her lap, out of sight. 2 bowls of stew, Jackson told the woman who came to take their order, and water, bread, and whiskey for cleaning wounds. Whiskey? Katherine asked, confused. For your hands, Jackson explained. It will sting something fierce, but it will prevent infection. Katherine felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. You do not need to trouble yourself. They are just scratches. Miss Edwards, I watched you hide your hands the moment you saw them. That tells me they are more than just scratches, and it tells me you are ashamed of them. Jackson's voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. Now, we can sit here and pretend everything is fine while those wounds fester, or you can let me help. Your choice. Katherine bit her lip, torn between pride and practicality. Practicality won. Slowly, reluctantly, she brought her hands up and placed them on the table. In the restaurant's interior light, they looked even worse than she had feared. The fresh wounds from the rains were obvious, bleeding sluggishly, but so were the years of accumulated damage. Scars crisscrossed her palms and fingers. Her knuckles were enlarged and rough. Several fingernails were chipped or broken. They were the hands of someone who had worked hard and long, with no one to share the burden. She waited for Jackson to recoil, to make an excuse and leave. Instead, he studied her hands with the same careful attention he might give to an injured horse, his expression thoughtful rather than disgusted. These are working hands, he said finally. They tell a story. How long have you been running a ranch by yourself? Katherine blinked in surprise. How did you know? The callus is here. Jackson touched a spot on her palm so lightly she barely felt it. Those are from handling rains day after day. These scars are from barbed wire. This one looks like it might be from a branding iron. And the way your fingers are bent slightly at the joints, that is from hard, repetitive work. I know because my hands look similar. He held up his own hands, and Katherine saw that he was right. His hands were just as scarred and calloused as hers, though larger and stronger. The woman returned with their order, including a bottle of whiskey and clean cloths. Jackson poured some of the whiskey onto a cloth and looked at Katherine. This is going to hurt, he warned. I have felt worse, Katherine said, trying to sound braver than she felt. The whiskey burned like fire when Jackson carefully cleaned the wounds on her palms, but Katherine pressed her lips together and refused to make a sound. Jackson worked efficiently but gently, cleaning each cut with careful attention, his large hands surprisingly deft. When he finished, he tore strips from one of the cloths and wrapped her hands loosely, leaving her fingers free. There, he said. That should hold until you can see a proper doctor. Now eat. The stew was simple but delicious, and Katherine realized just how hungry she was. She ate slowly, mindful of her bandaged hands, while Jackson ate his own meal and watched her with those disconcertingly blue eyes. So, he said eventually, what brings you to San Diego? Katherine considered lying, but something about Jackson's straightforward manner made her want to be honest. I am running away, she said bluntly. My father died 3 months ago. He had been sick for a long time and the ranch was already failing. When he passed, the bank took everything. I had nothing left, no family, no prospects. I heard there were opportunities in California, so I sold what little I had and bought a ticket west. I am sorry about your father, Jackson said, and the sympathy in his voice sounded genuine. That must have been hard, caring for him and the ranch all by yourself. It was, Katherine admitted. But I managed. I always manage. She looked down at her bandaged hands. Though I am not sure anyone will hire me now, looking like this. I was hoping to find work as a seamstress, but these hands are not fit for delicate work. Why do you want to be a seamstress if you know ranching? Jackson asked, puzzled. Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because seamstresses are respectable. Because men might actually marry a seamstress. No man wants a wife with hands like mine. They want someone soft and pretty and delicate, someone who does not look like she has been wrestling cattle and hauling fence posts her whole life. Jackson was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "The right man would not care about your hands." "The right man," Catherine repeated bitterly. "I have yet to meet him. Every man I have ever known has expected me to be something I am not, softer, quieter, more feminine. When my mother was alive, she tried so hard to teach me to be a proper lady, but after she died, there was no time for that. There was only work." "Your mother would be proud of you," Jackson said firmly. "You kept the ranch going for 6 years after she died. You took care of your father, you survived. That takes more strength than most people have." Catherine felt unexpected tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "Thank you for saying that, even if it is not true." "It is true," Jackson insisted. "And for what it is worth, I think you would be wasted as a seamstress. You have skills that are actually useful out here. San Diego is growing fast. There are ranches and farms all around that need good workers, people who know what they are doing. With your experience, you could probably name your price." "As what?" Catherine asked skeptically. "A ranch hand. People would laugh." "Women do not do that kind of work, not officially." "Some do," Jackson said. "I know at least 2 women who run their own operations in the area. It is not easy, and yes, some people look down on them, but they are successful and they are respected by the people who matter." Catherine studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this? What do you get out of it?" Jackson met her gaze steadily. "Nothing. I am telling you because you look like someone who is about to give up on being who you really are in order to fit into someone else's idea of what you should be. I have seen too many people do that, and it never ends well." "You do not even know me," Catherine pointed out. "No," Jackson agreed, "but I know that you drove a stagecoach through bandit country with bleeding hands to save your passengers. I know that you worked yourself to the bone to care for your father and his ranch. I know that you are strong and capable and ashamed of it, and that is a damn shame." The profanity startled a laugh out of Catherine despite herself. "You have strong opinions for a stranger." Jackson grinned, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger and more carefree. "I have been told that before. My mother used to say I should think before I speak, but I never quite got the hang of it. Is your mother here in San Diego?" Catherine asked, curious about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. The grin faded. "No, she passed away 5 years ago. My father died when I was 12. It was just me and my mother for a long time, running a small ranch in Texas. When she died, I sold the place and headed west, looking for something new." "I am sorry," Catherine said softly. "It seems we have more in common than I thought." "Seems like it," Jackson agreed. "I have been working as a ranch hand here for the past 4 years, saving up to buy my own place eventually. The owner, Mr. Dalton, is a good man. He might have worked for you if you are interested. He is always complaining that he cannot find reliable workers." Catherine felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. "Mr. Yates." "Jackson," he corrected. "Jackson," Catherine said, testing the name on her tongue. "I appreciate everything you have done for me today, truly, but I cannot expect you to find me work. You have already done more than enough." "I am not doing it out of obligation," Jackson said. "I am doing it because I think you would be good at it and because Mr. Dalton needs the help. If you are interested, I can introduce you tomorrow morning. If not, that is fine too, but do not say no just because you think you should." Catherine looked at him, at this strange cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere and shown her more consideration in an hour than most people had in years. She thought about the future she had imagined, sitting in a shop somewhere, sewing seams and pretending to be something she was not. Then she thought about the feel of a horse beneath her, the satisfaction of a fence well mended, the smell of hay and leather and open air. "I would like that," she said finally. "To meet Mr. Dalton, I mean, though I cannot promise he will want to hire me." "He will," Jackson said confidently. "Trust me. Now finish your stew, and then I will help you find a room for the night. There is a boarding house not far from here that is run by a nice widow named Mrs. Chen. She is fair with her prices and keeps a clean establishment." Katherine ate the rest of her meal slowly, savoring each bite, while Jackson told her about San Diego and the surrounding area. He had an easy way of talking that made her feel comfortable, and she found herself relaxing in a way she had not in years. When they finished, Jackson insisted on paying for both meals despite her protests. "You can pay me back when you get your first wages," he said, ending the argument. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was indeed clean and well kept, a two-story building with a small garden in front. Mrs. Chen herself was a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked Katherine up and down, taking in her dusty traveling clothes and bandaged hands, then quoted a price that was more than fair. "I can pay for a week in advance," Katherine said, calculating rapidly how much of her carefully hoarded money she could afford to spend. "After that, I will need to find work." "Jackson says you might work at Dalton Ranch," Mrs. Chen asked, her English clear but accented. "Possibly," Katherine said cautiously. "If Mr. Dalton will have me," Mrs. Chen nodded sharply. "Good ranch. Good man, you work hard, you do well. I have room on second floor, faces east, morning sun. You want?" "Yes, please," Katherine said. While Katherine counted out coins, Jackson spoke quietly with Mrs. Chen in what sounded like Cantonese. Katherine was surprised until she remembered that San Diego had a significant Chinese community, and Jackson had probably picked up the language working in the area. When Katherine handed over her payment, Mrs. Chen gave her a key and a look that was almost maternal. "You eat breakfast here, included in price. I cook at dawn. You miss breakfast, you go hungry." She pointed a stern finger at Jackson. "You bring her to ranch tomorrow." "Yes, madam," Jackson said, sounding amused. "Good, you be gentleman. I hear otherwise I tell Mr. Dalton and he fire you." "I am always a gentleman," Jackson protested. Mrs. Chen made a skeptical noise but smiled. "You not so bad. Now go, let the girl rest. She looks like she fall over." Jackson tipped his hat to Mrs. Chen and turned to Katherine. "I will come by at dawn tomorrow to take you to the ranch. Get some sleep. You have had a hard day." "Thank you," Katherine said, meaning it more than she could express, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not helped me." "You would have figured something out," Jackson said with certainty. "You are a survivor, Katherine Edwards. I could tell that the moment I saw you." He paused, then added, "And for what it is worth, there is nothing wrong with your hands. They show you are strong and capable. Any man who cannot see that is a fool." Before Katherine could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the darkening street with a final wave. Katherine stood on the porch for a moment, her bandaged hands tingling not from pain, but from the memory of how carefully Jackson had tended them. Then she went inside, following Mrs. Chen up the stairs to her room. The room was small but scrupulously clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that did indeed face east. Katherine sat on the bed and slowly unwound the bandages on her hands, examining Jackson's work. He had done a good job. The wounds were clean, and the wrappings were firm but not too tight. She rewrapped them carefully, then lay back on the bed, fully clothed, too exhausted to even remove her boots. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the strange turn her life had taken. This morning, She had been on a stagecoach, fleeing toward an uncertain future and a respectable life that felt like a prison. Now she was in San Diego, in a clean room she could barely afford, with the possibility of real work and a cowboy with kind blue eyes who said her scarred, rough hands were nothing to be ashamed of. Katherine fell asleep wondering if she was being foolish to feel hopeful, and dreamed of wide open spaces and someone who looked at her hands and saw strength instead of shame. Dawn came early, announced by the birds in Mrs. Chen's garden and the smell of cooking rice and vegetables drifting up from below. Katherine washed her face and hands carefully, red-dressed in her least dusty outfit which was still embarrassingly worn, and went downstairs to find Mrs. Chen presiding over a table laden with food. "Sit, eat, Mrs. Chen commanded, and Katherine obeyed, finding herself at a table with 3 other boarders, all men who worked at the docks. They nodded polite greetings but were more interested in their breakfast than in conversation, which suited Katherine fine. The food was unfamiliar but delicious, rice porridge with vegetables and small pieces of fish, and Katherine ate until she was pleasantly full. She was helping Mrs. Chen clear the dishes when there was a knock at the door. Jackson stood on the porch, his hat in his hands, looking freshly scrubbed and somehow more nervous than he had the day before. "Morning," he said. "Are you ready?" Katherine nodded, suddenly feeling her own nervousness rise. What if Mr. Dalton took one look at her and laughed at the idea of hiring a woman? What if she had let herself hope for nothing? They walked through San Diego as the town came to life around them. Shopkeepers opening their doors, children running to school, wagons rumbling past. Jackson kept up a steady stream of conversation about the area, pointing out landmarks and telling stories that helped distract Katherine from her anxiety. The Dalton Ranch was about 3 miles outside of town, he explained. A good-sized operation with cattle, horses, and some farming. "Mr. Dalton is originally from Pennsylvania," Jackson said as they walked. "He came out here 20 years ago with his wife and built the ranch from nothing. Mrs. Dalton passed away a few years back, and their children are grown and gone, so it is mostly just him and the workers now. He is getting older and finding it harder to manage everything himself, which is why he keeps hiring more help." "How many people work there?" Katherine asked. 10, including me. A mix of ranch hands, a cook, and a foreman named Miguel who has been with Mr. Dalton since the beginning. You will like Miguel. He is fair and does not tolerate nonsense from anyone." They walked out of town, following a well-worn road that led into rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional oak tree. The morning air was cool and pleasant, though Katherine knew it would be hot by midday. She tried not to think about how her hands ached with every movement, focusing instead on the landscape and the occasional glimpses of cattle in the distance. The Dalton Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a collection of buildings clustered around a main house, with corrals and pastures stretching out in all directions. It was larger than Katherine's family ranch had been, clearly prosperous and well-maintained. Her nervousness increased. Jackson led her to the main house, a sturdy adobe structure with a wide porch. Before they could knock, the door opened and a man stepped out. He was in his 60s, Katherine guessed, with white hair and a weathered face, but his eyes were sharp and assessing as they looked her over. "Mr. Dalton," Jackson said, "this is Miss Katherine Edwards, the woman I told you about." "The one who drove the stagecoach through the bandit attack," Mr. Dalton said, and Katherine realized that news of yesterday's excitement had already spread. Of course it had. This was a small community. "Yes, sir," Katherine said, lifting her chin and meeting his gaze directly. She had learned long ago that showing fear or uncertainty was the surest way to lose respect. though I cannot claim it was heroic. I simply did what needed to be done. That is exactly the kind of person I need, Mr. Dalton said bluntly. Someone who does what needs to be done without waiting to be told. Jackson says you ran your father's ranch in Arizona for 6 years. That true? Yes, sir. After my mother died, it was just my father and me, and he was ill for much of that time. I handled most of the daily operations. Size of the operation: 50 head of cattle, a dozen horses, 40 acres. Small but difficult terrain, rocky and dry. We had constant problems with water. Mr. Dalton nodded. What happened to it? My father died 3 months ago. The ranch was already failing. The bank took it. I am sorry for your loss. Mr. Dalton's voice was gruff but sincere. It is hard losing a parent, harder still losing your livelihood at the same time. What kind of work are you looking for? Katherine took a deep breath. Honestly, sir, I will take whatever you are willing to give me. I had thought to find genteel work in town, but Jackson suggested I might be of more use here. I can handle horses, mend fences, work cattle, do basic blacksmithing and carpentry. I am a fair hand with a rifle and decent with a rope. I can keep books and manage supplies. What I cannot do is pretend to be helpless or ornamental. A smile tugged at the corner of Mr. Dalton's mouth. I have no use for helpless or ornamental. What I need is someone who can manage the horse operation. My foreman Miguel is excellent with cattle but less comfortable with horses, and Jackson here is spread too thin as it is. I have about 30 horses currently, mix of working animals and stock I am breeding to sell. They need training, care, medical attention when necessary. Could you handle that? Katherine's heart leaped. Yes, sir. Horses are my favorite part of ranching. I trained all of ours myself. Good. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You would have your own cabin, nothing fancy but private and weatherproof. Meals are communal, taken in the cookhouse. Work starts at dawn and ends at dusk, with Sundays mostly off unless there is an emergency. Does that suit you? $30 a month was more than Katherine had dared hope for. Yes, sir, very much so. Then you are hired. Jackson, show her to the empty cabin behind the barn, the one that Pete used before he moved on. Make sure it is cleaned out and habitable. Miss Edwards, take today to get settled. You start work tomorrow morning. Mr. Dalton paused, his eyes dropping to Katherine's bandaged hands. Those injuries going to be a problem? No, sir, Katherine said firmly. They will heal. They will not affect my work. See that they do not. I have no patience for workers who cannot pull their weight, man or woman, but I am fair and I pay promptly. You do good work, you will have a place here as long as you want it. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Dalton nodded and went back inside, leaving Katherine and Jackson standing on the porch. Katherine realized she was shaking slightly, a combination of relief and excitement and residual fear. Breathe, Jackson said quietly, smiling at her. You did well. Mr. Dalton is not an easy man to impress. I cannot believe he hired me, Katherine said. Just like that, no questions about whether a woman can do the work. He does not care whether you are a man or a woman. He cares whether you can do the job. He lost a good horse trainer 6 months ago and has been searching for a replacement ever since. You walked in with exactly the skills he needs. Jackson started walking toward the barn. Come on, let me show you your new home. The cabin was small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a bed frame, a table, and 2 chairs. It was dusty from disuse but structurally sound, with a solid door and glass windows that opened to let in air. Katherine walked around the space slowly, hardly able to believe this was hers. I know it is not much, Jackson said, sounding almost apologetic, but it is private and the bed is comfortable. I can help you get it cleaned up, and we can requisition bedding and supplies from the main house." "It is perfect," Katherine said, and meant it. After years of sharing space with her ailing father, the idea of having her own place felt like unimaginable luxury. "When I woke up yesterday, I was terrified about what would happen to me. Now I have a job and a place to live. I feel like I must be dreaming." "Not a dream," Jackson assured her. "Though you will probably feel differently when you are up at dawn mucking out stalls," Katherine laughed. "I have been doing that since I was 12 years old. It will feel like coming home." They spent the rest of the morning cleaning the cabin, Jackson proving surprisingly handy with a broom and a mop. Katherine learned that he had been living in the bunkhouse with the other hands, a long building that housed 8 men in close quarters. He seemed genuinely happy for her that she would have privacy. "Is it difficult?" Katherine asked as they worked. "Living in such close quarters with so many people," Jackson shrugged. "You get used to it. Most of the men are decent enough, and the ones who are not learn quickly that Miguel will not tolerate troublemakers. But yes, privacy is nice. I am saving up to buy my own place someday, something small I can manage myself. Another few years of work and I should have enough." "What kind of place do you want?" Katherine asked, curious. Jackson's expression turned distant and thoughtful. "Something with good water, enough grazing for a small herd. Maybe some land that could be farmed if needed. Nothing too ambitious. Just a place that is mine, where I can make my own decisions and build something that lasts." "That sounds nice," Katherine said softly. "I hope you find it." "I will," Jackson said with quiet confidence. "It is just a matter of time and patience." They finished cleaning as the sun reached its peak, and Jackson showed Katherine to the cookhouse for lunch. The other ranch hands were already there, a diverse group of men ranging in age from their 20s to their 50s, including 2 Mexican vaqueros, a former soldier, and a Chinese man who worked primarily with the vegetable garden. They looked up with open curiosity when Katherine entered. "Everyone, this is Katherine Edwards," Jackson announced. "She is the new horse trainer. Katherine, this is everyone." The introductions were made quickly. Miguel, the foreman, was a stocky man in his 40s with a stern face that softened slightly when he shook Katherine's hand. "Welcome," he said simply. "You have questions, you ask. You have problems, you tell me. We run a good operation here." "Thank you," Katherine said. "I appreciate the welcome." The other men were friendly enough, though Katherine could see some skepticism in their eyes. She did not blame them. She was used to having to prove herself, and she knew she would have to work twice as hard as any man to be taken seriously. But she had done it before, and she would do it again. After lunch, Jackson took her to the stables to show her the horses. There were indeed about 30, a mix of working horses, breeding stock, and a few younger animals that needed training. Katherine walked along the stalls, studying each horse with the practiced eye of someone who had been around horses her entire life. They were good quality animals, well cared for but in need of more attention than they were currently getting. "This one has an abscess in her hoof," Katherine noted, pausing at a bay mare. "And this gelding has been favoring his right foreleg. That colt over there needs his hooves trimmed badly." Jackson looked impressed. "How can you tell all that just by looking?" "You learn to notice the small things. The way they stand, how they move, little signs of discomfort. Horses cannot tell you what is wrong, so you have to pay attention." Katherine reached out carefully to stroke the bay mare's nose, and the horse whickered softly. "She is a beauty. They all are. I am going to enjoy working with them." "They are lucky to have you," Jackson said, and something in his voice made Katherine look up sharply. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and admiring that made her heart skip a beat. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. I would not be here if you had not helped me yesterday." "I think you would have found your way eventually," Jackson said. "But I am glad I could help smooth the path." They stood there for a moment in the quiet of the stable, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the open doors, and Katherine felt something shift between them. It was not quite attraction, not yet, but the potential for it, the recognition that this person might be important in ways she had not anticipated. Then Jackson cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should let you get settled. If you need anything, my bunk is the third one on the left in the bunkhouse. Do not hesitate to ask." "I will be fine," Katherine assured him, though part of her wanted to ask him to stay longer. "Thank you again, Jackson." He tipped his hat to her and left, and Katherine spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the ranch, getting her bearings and planning her approach to the work ahead. By the time dinner came around, she was exhausted but deeply satisfied. She ate with the other hands, endured their curious questions with good humor, and retired to her cabin as the sun was setting. Alone in her new home, Katherine unwrapped her hands and examined them in the lamplight. They were already healing, the bleeding stopped and the wounds beginning to scab over. They were still rough, still scarred, still the hands of a working woman. But somehow they did not bother her as much as they had yesterday. Jackson's words echoed in her mind, about how they showed strength rather than shame. She rewrapped them carefully and climbed into bed, falling asleep almost instantly. Her dreams filled with horses and wide open spaces and blue eyes that looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. The next morning, Katherine woke before dawn and was at the stables before the sun rose, ready to begin her first full day of work. She started by examining each horse thoroughly, making notes about their condition and what each one needed. The bay mare with the abscess required immediate attention, so Katherine gathered the necessary supplies and got to work, carefully cleaning and treating the infected hoof while speaking softly to keep the mare calm. She was so focused on her work that she did not notice Jackson's approach until he spoke. "You have been at it for a while. Did you eat breakfast?" Katherine looked up, startled. "What time is it?" "Nearly 8. You have been out here for 3 hours. "Oh." Katherine had completely lost track of time. "I will eat later. I need to finish this first." "The mare will still be here after you eat," Jackson pointed out. "Come on. Cook gets cranky when people miss meals." Reluctantly, Katherine finished wrapping the mare's hoof and followed Jackson to the cookhouse. The other hands had already eaten and dispersed to their various duties, but the cook, a gruff man named Samuel, had saved some breakfast. Katherine ate quickly, conscious of the work waiting for her. "You do not have to prove yourself all in one day," Jackson said, watching her. "No one expects that." "I expect it of myself," Katherine replied. "I know what people are thinking. They are wondering if Mr. Dalton made a mistake hiring a woman. I need to show them he did not." "Katherine," Jackson said seriously, "the only person who doubts you is you. Everyone else is willing to give you a chance. Stop fighting battles that have not started yet." Katherine paused, his words hitting home. He was right. She had been so used to fighting for respect, for basic acknowledgement of her abilities, that she had assumed she would have to fight here too. But the men had been friendly at dinner the previous night, and Miguel had been welcoming. She was creating obstacles that might not actually exist. "You are right," she admitted. "I am used to having to prove myself constantly. It is hard to let go of that defensiveness." "I understand," Jackson said, "but try. You might be surprised by how much easier things are when you do not approach them as a fight." Katherine nodded and finished her breakfast, then returned to the stables to continue her work. Over the next few days, she fell into a routine. She rose before dawn, worked with the horses until breakfast, continued through the morning and afternoon with a break for lunch, and finished as the sun was setting. The work was hard and physical, exactly what she needed. Her hands healed slowly, the bandages coming off after a week to reveal fresh scars among the old ones. She proved herself not through grand gestures but through consistent, reliable work. The horses responded well to her, their condition visibly improving under her care. The gelding with the sore leg recovered with rest and liniment. The colt with overgrown hooves became more comfortable and easier to handle after she trimmed them. She started training sessions with the younger horses, teaching them to accept saddles and riders with patience and gentleness. The other ranch hands gradually accepted her presence. Miguel gave her a nod of approval at the end of her first week, which Jackson told her was high praise. The vaqueros, Carlos and Diego, started asking her advice about their own horses. Even Samuel, the cook, softened, saving her extra portions when he noticed she often worked through lunch. But it was Jackson she found herself most aware of. Jackson who seemed to show up whenever she needed an extra pair of hands. Jackson who sat with her at meals and told stories that made her laugh. Jackson who looked at her like she was exactly where she belonged. One evening, about 3 weeks after she started work, Katherine was in the corral working with a young stallion that had a tendency to spook. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and she was so focused on the horse that she did not notice the rattlesnake coiled near the fence post until the stallion reared, screaming in fear. Katherine held tight to the lead rope, trying to calm the panicked animal, but her position put her between the horse and the snake. She saw the serpent's head draw back to strike, and knew she did not have time to move. Then Jackson was there, seeming to appear out of nowhere, his knife flashing in the dying light as he killed the snake with one swift motion. The stallion bolted, jerking the rope from Katherine's hands, and she stumbled backward, her heart pounding. "Are you all right?" Jackson demanded, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. "Yes," Katherine managed. "Yes, I am fine, thank you. I did not see it." "Damn things blend right in at dusk," Jackson said. His hands were still on her shoulders, warm and steady, and Katherine realized she was shaking. "That was too close." "But you stopped it," Katherine said. "You saved me." "I am just glad I was here," Jackson said. His voice was rough with emotion, and when Katherine looked up at him, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was more than concern, deeper than friendship. It was the look of someone who had been terrified of losing something precious. "Jackson," she started, not sure what she was going to say, but he stepped back, releasing her shoulders, and the moment passed. "You should go clean up. I will catch the stallion and put him away for the night." Katherine nodded, still shaken, and walked back to her cabin on trembling legs. Inside, she sat on her bed and tried to process what had just happened. The snake, yes, that had been frightening. But more than that, the look in Jackson's eyes, the way he had touched her, the intensity of his concern. It had felt like something more than the care one coworker might show another. She looked down at her hands, rough and scarred as ever, and remembered the day they met, how carefully he had cleaned and bandaged them. How he had said any man who could not see their value was a fool. How he had looked at her in the stable that first day with something like admiration. Katherine had not let herself think about romance, about the possibility of someone wanting her for who she actually was, rather than some false version of femininity. But Jackson had been there from the beginning, steady and kind and utterly without judgment. He had seen her at her lowest and had helped without expecting anything in return. He had encouraged her to be herself, to take pride in her strength rather than hide it. And she realized, sitting there in her small cabin with the last light fading from the sky, that she had feelings for him. strong feelings that she had been suppressing because they seemed impossible, because she had learned long ago that men like Jackson, good men who treated her with respect, did not fall for women like her. But what if she was wrong? What if the look in his eyes had meant what she thought it meant? Katherine did not sleep well that night, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. The next morning she was tired and distracted, going through the motions of her work without her usual focus. Jackson noticed, of course. He always seemed to notice things about her. "You all right?" he asked when they were alone in the tack room organizing supplies. "Just thinking," Katherine said evasively, "about the snake, about a lot of things." Jackson was quiet for a moment, then said, "Katherine, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Yesterday, when I saw that snake about to strike, all I could think was that I could not let anything happen to you. Not just because you are a co-worker or because it would be a tragedy, but because the thought of you being hurt made me feel like I could not breathe." He paused, not looking at her. "I think you know what I am trying to say." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I think I do, but I need you to say it clearly. I need to be sure I am not misunderstanding." Jackson finally looked at her, and his blue eyes were full of emotion. "I have feelings for you, Katherine. Romantic feelings. I have since the day I met you, if I am being honest. You are the strongest, most capable, most interesting woman I have ever known, and every day I spend with you just makes me more certain that you are someone special." Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "Jackson, I am not the kind of woman men usually want. I am too rough, too outspoken, too comfortable with work that is considered masculine. My hands are scarred and calloused. I do not know how to be delicate or demure. I tried to be those things once for my mother's sake, but I failed at it. I will always fail at it because it is not who I am." "I do not want delicate or demure," Jackson said firmly. "I want you, exactly as you are." "You say that now," Katherine said, the words coming out more bitter than she intended. "But what about later? What about when you realize that I will never be the kind of wife who stays home and does needlework? What about when you want someone softer, more feminine?" Jackson stepped closer, his expression intense. "Katherine, listen to me. I do not want soft, I want strong. I do not want someone who needs protecting. I want someone who can stand beside me as an equal partner. I have watched you work for 3 weeks now, and I am in awe of you. The way you handle the horses, the way you threw yourself into building a life here, the courage it took to start over after losing everything. That is what I want. That is who I want." "My hands," Katherine said weakly, holding them up between them like a barrier. "Look at them, Jackson. They are not the hands of a lady. They are rough and scarred and ugly. No man wants to hold hands like these." Jackson took her hands in his, so gently, and looked down at them. Katherine watched his face, waiting for the flicker of disgust or disappointment, but it never came. Instead, he traced one of the scars with his thumb, his touch feather light. "These hands," he said quietly, "tell the story of your life. Every scar, every callus, every rough patch earned through hard work and survival and taking care of the people you loved. How could I find them anything but beautiful?" He raised her hands to his lips and kissed each palm softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "They are perfect, Katherine, just like the rest of you." Katherine felt something break open inside her, some wall she had been maintaining for years. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to believe you mean it. I am afraid that if I let myself love you, you will change your mind and I will be left with a broken heart." "I cannot promise that I will never hurt you," Jackson said honestly. "But I can promise that I will never ask you to be anything other than yourself. I can promise that I will value you for who you are, not some imaginary version of who I think you should be. And I can promise that if you give me a chance, I will spend every day proving to you that you made the right choice." He paused, then added softly, "I am afraid too, you know. I am afraid you will decide I am not good enough for you. I am just a ranch hand with dreams but no property, no fortune to offer you. All I have is my word and my heart, and both are yours if you want them." Katherine looked up at him, at this good, honest man who saw her clearly and wanted her anyway, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. "Jackson Yates, I think I am falling in love with you." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out. "Katherine Edwards, I know I am falling in love with you." Then he leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and careful, but it lit something inside Katherine that she had not known existed. She dropped his hands to wrap her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I wish you had done it sooner," Katherine said, making him laugh. They stood there in the tack room, holding each other, while outside the ranch carried on with its daily business. Eventually, they would have to go back to work to maintain the propriety that was expected. But for now, in this moment, Katherine let herself simply be happy. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. They were careful to be discreet around the other ranch hands, but Katherine suspected everyone knew anyway. Miguel certainly knew, judging by the knowing looks he gave them, but he said nothing as long as their work did not suffer. And it did not. If anything, Katherine worked harder than ever, driven by a happiness she had never experienced before. Jackson courted her properly, within the limits of what was possible on a working ranch. He brought her wildflowers he found while riding the property. He sat with her in the evenings after work, and they talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams. He taught her a few words of Cantonese he had learned from Mrs. Chen and the other Chinese workers. She taught him a complicated knot her father had shown her years ago. They stole kisses when they were alone, brief touches that left Katherine wanting more. But they took things slowly, both of them aware that this was important, worth doing right. Jackson was adamant about treating her with respect, about not compromising her reputation. Katherine appreciated it even as she sometimes wished he would be a little less honorable. 2 months after they first kissed, Jackson asked if she would ride out with him on a Sunday afternoon. Katherine agreed eagerly, happy for any excuse to spend more time with him. They rode out to a spot Jackson knew, a small valley with a creek running through it and ancient oak trees providing shade. It was beautiful and peaceful, and Katherine understood immediately why he had brought her here. "I have been thinking about my future," Jackson said as they sat by the creek, their horses grazing nearby. "About what I want and where I am headed." "And," Katherine prompted when he fell silent. "And I realized that all my plans, all my dreams about buying land and building something, they all include you now. I cannot imagine doing any of it without you by my side." He turned to face her fully. "Katherine, I know we have not been courting for very long, and I know I do not have much to offer you yet. But I am asking anyway because waiting feels like a waste of time when I already know what I want. Will you marry me?" Katherine felt tears well up, happy tears this time. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Jackson pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, he produced a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he explained. "It is all I have left of her. I would be honored if you would wear it." Katherine held out her left hand, rough and scarred as ever, and Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and Katherine thought it looked right there, a symbol of love on hands that had known so much hard work. "We will have to tell Mr. Dalton," Katherine said practically, though she could not stop smiling. "And figure out where we will live. I assume your bunk is not big enough for two." Jackson laughed. "I already spoke to Mr. Dalton, actually. Last week, before I knew for sure what you would say but hopeful enough to start making plans. He said when we married, we could have the larger cabin near the main house. It is bigger than your current place, with 2 rooms and a proper kitchen. He also said he would increase both our wages slightly to help us save for our own place faster." "You thought of everything," Katherine said, impressed and touched. "I wanted to be ready. I wanted to show you that I am serious about building a life with you, that I have thought about the practical aspects as well as the romantic ones." Jackson squeezed her hand. "I know you value competence and planning. I wanted you to know I can provide both." "You are amazing," Katherine said simply. "When should we get married?" "As soon as possible, as far as I am concerned. But I will leave the timing up to you. Whatever you want, whatever makes you happy." They decided on 6 weeks, enough time to make basic arrangements, but not so long that the waiting would be torture. Katherine wrote to a distant cousin in Arizona, her only living relative, though she did not expect him to make the journey. Jackson had no family to invite. They would have a simple ceremony in San Diego with the ranch workers as witnesses, followed by a meal at the ranch. Nothing fancy, but it would be theirs. Mrs. Chen, when Katherine told her the news, was delighted. "I knew," she said with satisfaction. "I tell Jackson that first day you be good for him. He needs strong woman, you need good man, perfect match." Katherine laughed. "You saw all that in one meeting." "I see many people," Mrs. Chen said with a shrug. "I know what I know. Now you need wedding dress." "I have friend make beautiful dresses. We go see her tomorrow." "I cannot afford a fancy dress," Katherine protested. "Wedding gift," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "No arguments. You come to my house, I introduce you, we find something pretty. Make Jackson's eyes fall out of his head." Katherine found herself swept up in Mrs. Chen's enthusiasm, and the next Sunday she and Jackson went into town so Katherine could meet with the dressmaker. The woman, another Chinese immigrant named Lin, looked Katherine over with a professional eye. "You are tall, strong build," she observed. "Good posture. I make you something elegant but practical, yes. You do not want fancy frills." "No frills," Katherine agreed gratefully. "Something simple but nice." What Lynn created over the next few weeks was perfect. A dress of deep blue fabric that brought out Katherine's eyes, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that was full enough to be feminine, but not so elaborate that Katherine felt ridiculous. The sleeves were long, covering the scars on her arms, and the neckline was modest but flattering. When Katherine tried it on for the final fitting, she barely recognized herself. "You look beautiful," Jackson said when he saw her, his voice rough with emotion. "I look like someone pretending to be a lady," Katherine said nervously. "You look like yourself, just in a fancy dress," Jackson corrected. "You could never be anyone but yourself, Katherine. That is what I love about you." The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, clear and warm but not too hot. Katherine dressed in her cabin with Mrs. Chen's help, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened the buttons. She looked at herself in the small mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized, confident, happy, loved. Her hands were still rough and scarred, but with Jackson's mother's ring on her finger, they looked exactly right. The ceremony was held in the small church in San Diego, attended by Mr. Dalton, the ranch workers, Mrs. Chen, and several of her boarders, and a handful of other people from town who Jackson and Katherine had befriended. The priest was a kindly older man who kept the service simple and heartfelt. When Jackson took Katherine's hands to say his vows, he did so without hesitation, his grip firm and sure. I promise to love you for who you are, he said, looking into her eyes. To support your dreams and share your burdens. To stand beside you as an equal partner in all things. To never ask you to be anything other than your true self. And to remind you every day how extraordinary you are, in case you forget. Catherine's own vows were simple. I promise to love you with all my heart, to trust you with my fears and share with you my joys, to work beside you to build the life we both want, and to believe in us, even when I am afraid. You have shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued, and I will spend my life trying to give you the same gift. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed her soundly, to the applause and cheers of their friends. They walked out of the church hand in hand, and Katherine felt a surge of joy so intense it almost hurt. She had never imagined she could be this happy. The celebration at the ranch was lively and warm, with food and drink and music provided by Carlos on a guitar and Diego on a fiddle. Katherine danced with her new husband under the stars, surrounded by people who had become like family, and thought about how much her life had changed in just a few months. She had arrived in San Diego with nothing, ashamed of who she was and afraid of the future. Now she had work she loved, a home, friends, and a husband who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had retired and they were finally alone in their new cabin, Jackson took Catherine's hands and kissed them again, just as he had that day in the tack room. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For trusting me. For believing me when I said your hands were perfect. For being brave enough to let me love you." "I think I am the one who should be thanking you," Katherine said. "You saw me when I could not see myself. You gave me back my pride and helped me understand that being strong is not something to apologize for." Jackson smiled. "We saved each other then. That seems like a good foundation for a marriage." They made love that night for the first time, a tender and passionate exploration that left Katherine feeling even more connected to this man who had become her partner in all things. Afterward, lying in his arms, she looked at her hands in the moonlight streaming through the window. They were still rough and scarred, still the hands of a working woman. But now they were also the hands of a wife, wearing a gold band that symbolized love and commitment and a future full of possibilities. Life settled into a new rhythm. Jackson and Katherine worked side by side, managing the horse operation together while continuing to help with the general ranch work. They saved their money diligently, both of them focused on the goal of buying their own property. Mr. Dalton, who seemed to have a soft spot for the young couple, gave them additional responsibilities and small bonuses when the ranch did particularly well. A year after their wedding, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She had seen her own mother worn down by the difficulties of ranch life and childbearing, had watched her father struggle alone after his wife's death. What if she could not handle both motherhood and the work she loved? What if she had to give up the life she had built? Jackson, sensing her anxiety, sat her down one evening and took her hands. "Talk to me," he said simply. "What are you afraid of?" Katherine explained her fears, expecting him to dismiss them or assure her that everything would magically work out. Instead, he listened carefully and then nodded. "Those are legitimate concerns," he said. "But we are not your parents, Katherine. We are partners. We will figure this out together. If you need to take time away from the heavy work, we will manage. If you want to keep working as long as you can, I will support that. And after the baby comes, we will share the parenting just like we share everything else. You will not have to choose between being a mother and being yourself." "You make it sound so simple," Katherine said, but she felt some of her anxiety ease. "It will not be simple," Jackson admitted. but it will be manageable because we will handle it together. That is what partners do. Catherine's pregnancy proceeded smoothly, and she continued working with the horses until she was 6 months along, at which point Mr. Dalton gently but firmly insisted she take on lighter duties. She transitioned to managing the books and supplies, which she found she actually enjoyed. Jackson picked up the slack without complaint, often working longer hours to ensure the horses received the care they needed. Their son was born in May 1880, a healthy baby boy they named James Edward Yates. Katherine had been terrified of childbirth, remembering horror stories her mother had told, but Mrs. Chen attended her as a midwife, and the birth, while painful and exhausting, went as well as could be expected. When Jackson was allowed in to meet his son, he cried, holding the tiny bundle with the careful reverence of someone handling the most precious thing in the world. "He is perfect," Jackson said, his voice choked with emotion. "Katherine, you are incredible. Look what we made." Motherhood was harder than Katherine had anticipated, the sleepless nights and constant demands challenging in ways different from physical labor. But Jackson kept his promise, taking on far more of the parenting duties than most men of their time would consider. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with James when he was fussy, learned to soothe the baby so Katherine could sleep. They worked out a system where they split the night into shifts, each handling the baby for a few hours so the other could rest. Mrs. Chen also proved invaluable, appearing regularly with food and advice and offers to watch James so Katherine could have a few hours to herself. The other ranch workers, particularly Miguel, were surprisingly helpful, treating the baby like a collective responsibility. Katherine learned that community could be chosen, not just inherited, and that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom. By the time James was 6 months old, Katherine was back to working with the horses, bringing the baby with her in a sling Jackson had fashioned from soft leather. James seemed to love being in the stables, cooing happily at the horses and falling asleep to the sounds of Katherine's voice as she worked. It was not conventional, but it worked for them, and that was what mattered. When James was 18 months old, Jackson came home one evening with news that made Katherine's heart leap. "Mr. Dalton wants to sell us some land," he announced, unable to contain his excitement. 80 acres on the northern edge of his property, near that valley where I proposed to you. He is giving us a very fair price, and he is willing to let us pay it off over time. Katherine, we can finally have our own place." They spent the next year preparing, saving every penny they could and planning their future home. Jackson and Katherine worked together to design a house that would suit their needs, something practical but comfortable, with room for their growing family. Katherine was pregnant again, a fact that filled them both with joy and only increased their determination to build something lasting. Their daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Yates, was born in the spring of 1882, an easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. James, now a rambunctious toddler, was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. The house was completed that summer, a sturdy adobe structure with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, and a wide porch that looked out over their land. Jackson had built most of it himself with help from the other ranch workers, and Katherine contributed where she could, helping with the lighter work and managing the logistics. When they finally moved in, Katherine stood on that porch with Jackson's arm around her waist and their children playing at their feet and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "We did it," she said softly. "We built something real." "We did," Jackson agreed, "and this is just the beginning. We have the rest of our lives to keep building." They started small, with a dozen cattle and the horses they had been breeding while at the Dalton Ranch. Katherine managed the horse operation while Jackson handled the cattle and the general property maintenance. It was hard work, made harder by two small children, but they had learned how to work as a team. They divided responsibilities based on skills and necessity rather than traditional gender roles, and they made it work. Mr. Dalton remained a supportive presence, offering advice when asked and helping them navigate the challenges of starting their own operation. He had become something of a father figure to both Jackson and Katherine, and they named him as godfather to both their children. The years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. Their ranch grew slowly but steadily, gaining a reputation for quality horses and honest dealing. Katherine became known throughout the area as an expert horse trainer, one of the few women working professionally in that capacity. Some people looked down on her for it, but most respected her skill and results. Jackson handled the business negotiations, his easy manner and fair dealing winning them loyal customers. They had two more children, a son named Daniel in 1884 and another daughter named Emma in 1886. Their house was always full of noise and activity, children running wild through the property, horses whinnying in the corrals, the constant bustle of ranch life. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. Katherine's hands never softened. They remained rough and calloused, scarred from years of hard work. But she had long since stopped being ashamed of them. She wore her wedding ring with pride, and when her children were old enough to ask about her scars, she told them honestly about the work she did and why it mattered. "Your mama has the strongest hands I know," Jackson told James one day when the boy was perhaps 8 years old. "See how she can handle that stallion. That takes strength, but also gentleness. Your mama is special because she is both tough and kind. Will my hands look like mama's when I grow up?" James asked. "If you work hard and do meaningful things, yes, they might," Jackson said. "And you should be proud if they do, because it will mean you are building something that matters." Katherine overheard this exchange and felt her eyes well with tears. She had spent so much of her life ashamed of what her hands represented, unable to see them as anything but evidence of her failure to be feminine and delicate. But Jackson had helped her understand that strength was its own kind of beauty, and now he was teaching their children the same lesson. One evening, when they had been married for 10 years and their children were asleep in their beds, Katherine and Jackson sat together on their porch watching the sunset. Jackson took her hand, as he often did, and traced the familiar scars with his thumb. "You remember the day we met?" he asked. "When you were hiding your hands because you were ashamed of them." "Of course I remember," Katherine said. "I thought my rough hands meant no one would ever want me. I thought I was too broken, too unfeminine to deserve love." "I am glad you were wrong," Jackson said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it softly. "These hands are perfect. They built this life we have. They hold our children. They do work that matters. They are beautiful because they are yours, and you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known." Katherine leaned against him, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "You know, sometimes I think about that day in San Diego when I climbed off that stagecoach convinced my life was over. I was so lost, so ashamed, so certain I would never find a place where I belonged. And then you appeared and changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Jackson said. "I had been just drifting, working and saving, but without any real purpose beyond buying land someday. You gave me something to work toward, someone to build a future with. You made me want to be better, to do more." "We saved each other," Katherine said, echoing words Jackson had spoken on their wedding night. "We did," Jackson agreed. And we will keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives. That is what love is, I think. Choosing each other, again and again, through all the hard work and the daily struggles and the moments of doubt. Choosing to see each other clearly and love what we see. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors fade from the sky. Then Katherine said, "Do you remember what you told me that day? When I said my hands were too rough for a lady, I said they were perfect here," Jackson recalled. "And I meant it. Your hands are perfect for this life we have built. Perfect for the work you do, perfect for holding our children, perfect for holding mine. Perfect because they are honest and strong and capable, just like you." Katherine turned her hand over in his, palm up, and they both looked at it in the fading light. It was rough and calloused, scarred and weathered, the hand of someone who had worked hard for everything she had. And it was beautiful because it represented a life lived fully and honestly, without apology or pretense. "I love my life," Katherine said softly. "I love our children, our ranch, this place we have built together. But most of all, I love you, Jackson Yates. Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself. Thank you for loving me exactly as I am." "Thank you for letting me," Jackson replied. "And for being brave enough to believe that you deserve to be loved." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. Their hands, both rough and scarred from years of labor, were intertwined, and in that simple touch was a world of love and commitment and shared dreams realized. As the years continued to pass, the Yates ranch prospered. Their children grew strong and capable, each learning the value of hard work and honest dealing from their parents' example. James showed an aptitude for working with cattle and was clearly interested in eventually taking over that aspect of the operation. Sarah developed her mother's gift with horses, often spending hours in the stables learning everything Katherine could teach her. Daniel had a head for numbers and helped manage the ranch accounts even as a young boy. Emma, the youngest, was still finding her way but showed signs of inheriting her father's easy manner and gift for negotiation. Katherine and Jackson made sure all their children, daughters as well as sons, learned every aspect of ranching. They taught them to ride and rope, to mend fences and manage livestock, to keep books and negotiate sales. But they also taught them to read and write well, bringing in a tutor when the children were young and later sending them to the school in San Diego. Education mattered, Katherine insisted, because the world was changing and their children needed to be prepared for it. The community around them grew and changed as well. San Diego was becoming a real city, with new businesses and families arriving regularly. Katherine and Jackson became respected members of the community, known for their fair dealing and their willingness to help neighbors in need. When a drought struck one year, they shared their water with smaller ranchers who were struggling. When a family lost their home to fire, Katherine and Jackson organized a barn raising and collection to help them rebuild. Mrs. Chen remained a close friend, a beloved auntie to the Yates children even as she grew older. She eventually sold her boarding house and moved to a small cottage near the Yates ranch, where she helped with the children and cooked meals and dispensed wisdom with the same sharp tongue and warm heart she had always had. When she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, Katherine cried for days, mourning the loss of the woman who had been like a mother to her. Mr. Dalton also grew older, eventually retiring from active management of his ranch and leaving it in Miguel's capable hands. He spent his final years as a frequent visitor to the Yates home, delighting in their children, and taking pride in the success of the young couple he had taken a chance on years before. When he passed away, he left a portion of his property to Jackson and Katherine, increasing their holdings and ensuring their financial security. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when the weather did not cooperate, when calves died or horses got sick, when money was tight and worry kept them awake at night. There were times when Katherine and Jackson disagreed, when the stress of running a ranch and raising a family created tension between them. But they had learned early on how to talk to each other honestly, how to work through problems rather than letting them fester, and they weathered each storm together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Katherine with a gift. It was a painting, done by an artist from San Diego, showing Katherine in the corral working with a young horse. In the painting, her hands were prominently featured, rough and capable, and her face showed the concentration and gentleness she brought to her work. It was beautiful and honest, capturing exactly who Katherine was. "This is how I see you," Jackson said when she was speechless with emotion. "Strong and capable and completely yourself. I wanted you to have a reminder of how extraordinary you are." Katherine hung the painting in their parlor, where it remained for the rest of their lives, a testament to how far she had come from the frightened woman who had climbed off a stagecoach, ashamed of her own hands. As they grew older, Jackson and Katherine gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to their children. James took primary responsibility for the cattle, proving to be a natural leader with a gift for innovation. Sarah managed the horses, eventually gaining a reputation that exceeded even her mother's. Daniel handled the business side of things, his careful management ensuring the ranch remained profitable. Emma, who had surprised everyone by developing a passion for breeding and agriculture, started an experimental program growing new crops suited to California's climate. Jackson and Katherine became grandparents, delighting in the next generation while enjoying the freedom to focus on each other again. They took long rides together across their property, revisiting the places that held special meaning. The valley where Jackson had proposed, the spot where their house stood, the creek where their children had learned to swim. They traveled occasionally, taking a trip to San Francisco and even venturing east to see the places Jackson had left behind so many years before. But they always came home to their ranch, to the life they had built together, to the community that had embraced them. San Diego continued to grow around them, transforming from a rough frontier town into a proper city, but the essential character of the place remained. It was still a place where hard work was valued, where a person could reinvent themselves, where the past mattered less than what you did in the present. On a warm evening in the spring of 1905, Jackson and Katherine sat together on their porch as they had countless times before. They were in their 70s now, their hair gray and their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work. But their hands were still strong, still capable of the work they loved even if they did it at a slower pace now. "You have any regrets?" Katherine asked, a question that had been on her mind lately as she reflected on their long life together. Jackson considered carefully before answering. "No major ones. There are small things I might have done differently, decisions I might have made better. But the important things, the choices that mattered, I would make all of them again. I would still help the woman who climbed off that stagecoach with bleeding hands. I would still fall in love with her. I would still build this life with her. What about you?" Katherine looked at her hands, still rough and scarred after all these years, now with the addition of age spots and the slight tremor that came with getting older. She thought about the girl she had been, so ashamed of these hands, so convinced they made her unworthy of love. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the struggles and triumphs, all the moments of doubt and joy. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Not a single one. This life we built, this family we raised, the work we have done, it is all exactly what I needed. You gave me the courage to be myself, Jackson. You looked at my rough hands and saw beauty instead of shame. That changed everything." Jackson took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining in the familiar way of people who had been together for decades. "Your hands were always beautiful to me," he said. "They told me everything I needed to know about who you were, strong, capable, honest, real. I fell in love with these hands before I fell in love with the rest of you." "You are a strange man, Jackson Yates," Katherine said with a laugh. "What kind of person falls in love with someone's hands?" "The kind who recognizes that hands tell the truth about a person," Jackson replied. "Your hands told me you were a survivor, a fighter, someone who did what needed to be done no matter how hard it was. Those are the qualities I wanted in a partner, and I found them in you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had worked for so many years. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, the sounds of dinner being prepared in the house, the familiar noises of the ranch settling down for the evening. It was ordinary and perfect, exactly the life Katherine had never dared to dream she could have. "I love you," she said, the words as true as the first time she had spoken them. "I love you too," Jackson replied. "Always have, always will." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine rested her head on Jackson's shoulder and marveled at how far they had come from that September day in 1878, when a terrified woman with rough hands had stumbled off a stagecoach and been helped by a kind cowboy. They had built an entire life from that moment, raised a family, created a legacy that would outlast them both. Her hands were still rough. They would always be rough, marked by the work of a lifetime. But Jackson had been right all along. They were perfect, not despite their roughness but because of it. They were the hands of a woman who had lived fully and honestly, who had worked hard and loved deeply, who had refused to apologize for being strong. And every time Jackson kissed those hands, which he did often even after all these years, Katherine was reminded that she was exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be, held by someone who saw her clearly and loved her completely. They lived out their remaining years surrounded by family, in a home filled with love, on land they had earned through hard work and determination. When Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Katherine mourned deeply, but took comfort in knowing they had built something that would endure. She lived for another 5 years, remaining active in the ranch operations and delighting in her growing number of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. When Katherine finally passed away at 81, she was buried next to Jackson on a hillside overlooking their ranch, the valley where he had proposed visible in the distance. At her funeral, attended by what seemed like half of San Diego, Sarah spoke about her mother's legacy. "My mother taught us that strength comes in many forms," Sarah said, addressing the crowd with her mother's own directness. "She taught us that a woman can be both gentle and powerful, both feminine and capable. She taught us that our hands are meant to be used, that work is honorable, and that we should never apologize for being who we truly are. She showed us what it means to live honestly and love completely. We will miss her terribly, but her spirit lives on in all of us, in the work we do, in the way we treat each other, in the life she and my father built here." The Yates Ranch continued to prosper under the management of Katherine's children and their descendants, eventually becoming one of the most respected horse breeding operations in California. The painting of Katherine working with horses remained in the family parlor for generations, a reminder of the woman who had founded their legacy. And the story of how Jackson and Katherine met, how he had kissed her rough hands and told her they were perfect, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what real love looked like. It was a story about seeing people truly, about valuing strength over conventional femininity, about building a partnership based on mutual respect and shared dreams. It was a story about how a moment of kindness could change lives, how love could give someone the courage to be their authentic self, how the right person would never ask you to be anything other than who you were. And at its heart, it was a story about hands, rough and scarred and absolutely perfect, just as Jackson had always said they were.